This is from the early days of hobby computing in the 70s in essentially Silicon Valley, what is now called Silicon Valley. This was a group of people from various origins who were interested in tinkering with computers as a hobby, which was a thing that was just about affordable by this point. The thing about the Homebrew Club, it's set up in the environs of Stanford, and it became very popular very quickly. It met at the Stanford Linear Accelerator building, and it had as it were, an ethos, a sensibility, which was that people were all in it together. They were experimenting, but they were sharing the results of their experiments. And the idea was that if somebody came in with a piece of code, say, then the piece of code could be shared. And the rule was that if you recorded code latterly on cassette tapes, because this was a medium that was just coming in for recording computer software, you could borrow a cassette tape from what became a relatively formal library if you brought it back, and especially if you brought back another cassette tape with your own contribution. So it's a kind of moral economy, if you like. But it's a moral economy where sharing is a prime virtue.
Right.
Now the problem with this...
Which is kind of an internet ethos these days, is it not?
Yeah. The Apple system emerged from this, although slightly departed from it very fast. But Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs were in the Homebrew Club. And the early prototypes of the Apple I and the Apple II were shown in this Homebrew Club to other participants. It became an issue with Gates and his then very young company, Microsoft, when the Homebrew Club tried to incorporate into its moral economy the code for the basic programming language that had been written for the Altair, which was a manufactured hobby computer. That basic had been written by Microsoft. It was Microsoft's founding product. And so when Gates found out that this code had been essentially appropriated and was circulating through the hobbyists, he wrote an open letter which has become a famous statement in the history of computing, denouncing their practice as theft and arguing essentially that in order to build quality software and to make of this more than just a game, you had to develop real kind of corporate strategies which involved property. And if you'd simply shared, then it was a violation of this. It really was theft to him. That letter, which is called an open letter to hobbyists, has come to mark a parting of the ways, as it were, between the ethos of sharing, openness, research, exploration, and the proprietorial, relatively closed approach that Microsoft still has to this day.
Gates said that in order to have real progress, you had to treat it as serious intellectual property and you can't steal it and so forth. Do you think Linux is the living refutation of that?
Yes, essentially. It's actually a slightly complicated business because of Linux's background and the fact that it's not just one thing. It's been developed on different bases. But yes, and I think Microsoft actually came to realize that in the 1990s when Linux, having kind of burst on the scene, didn't just disappear, didn't kind of find itself riddled with flaws. When flaws and viruses and so on showed up, Linux proved amazingly efficient at dealing with them, getting rid of them. So there's again a famous moment when some internal Microsoft documents were leaked to the open source community. These became known as the Halloween documents. You can look them up online if you want, which revealed the concern within Microsoft's higher echelons when it was realized that Linux wasn't a flash in the pan and that there really was an alternative model for how to proceed here that was viable and in some ways more viable than proprietary models. So I think the short answer to that is yes.
This excerpt is brought to you by the Massachusetts School of Law, the leader of reform in legal education and a leader in multimedia education for the public. To view the full interview and for a full listing of MSL's programs, log on to mslaw.edu.